Pima County deputies have completely cordoned off the Catalina foothills as the hunt for Nancy Guthrie intensifies. The perimeter centers on Orange Grove and First Avenue, with Placita de Graciela and Camino de Michael currently under total lockdown. A correspondent remains positioned near the heart of the activity to monitor the unfolding situation. What fresh intelligence has surfaced since our last briefing on this developing crisis? We are currently embedded in the Shadow Hills Enclave, an area now saturated by a massive law enforcement presence. Tactical lines continue to advance through the neighborhood, specifically tightening around the intersection of Camino de Michael and Placita de Michael. Visuals from tonight confirm that this mobilization is an escalation of the ongoing Nancy Guthrie disappearance. This heavy presence has been maintained for 2 hours, with investigators appearing to focus their scrutiny on a single residence. While reports suggest 2 individuals were taken into custody, the sheriff's office has yet to verify arrests or issue a formal statement. We have observed specialized SWAT units and heavily armored transports arriving alongside more than 20 additional police vehicles. Residents found themselves barred from their own streets for at least 90 minutes as the operation unfolded. A slow trickle of neighbors is only now being permitted to return to their homes. The Catalina foothills seems an improbable setting for such violence, defined by silent, sprawling avenues and million-dollar estates tucked away from view. It is a place of manicured aesthetics, where residents recognize every passing car and every morning jogging routine. In this affluent Arizona zip code, crime is a ghost. When it finally manifests, it commands the undivided attention of the nation. And that night, the country's heart stopped. During the cold transition from January 31st to February 1st, 2026, an 84-year-old woman was taken from her sanctuary. Blood was found staining her porch, and her digital surveillance went dark at precisely 1:47 in the morning. By the time the alarm was raised, Nancy Guthrie, the mother of a prominent national news anchor, had already vanished into the night. Today marks nearly 2 months since she disappeared, and Nancy remains lost to the shadows. Yet, the momentum of this investigation has just undergone a profound and unsettling shift. The FBI has returned to these quiet streets, not for a routine check, but with a far more clinical and aggressive objective. Federal agents are now reportedly conducting interviews with a specific, pointed list of names, seeking answers that have long remained elusive. This renewed focus is centered on a particular house located just steps from Nancy's own front door, a residence that had, until very recently, been sitting entirely vacant. A veteran SWAT commander from this very jurisdiction has raised a disturbing theory regarding that empty property. He believes the house served as a tactical staging ground, a cold, calculated vantage point used to monitor every movement on the street. Someone may have been watching and waiting before the events of February 1st. Today, we examine that structure through a forensic lens. We aren't merely looking at the building. We are dissecting its role in a suspected criminal operation. A retired commander with 3 decades of local experience has mapped out exactly what he believes was transpiring behind those walls. The chilling language he used to describe the scene provides a terrifying new perspective on the abduction. This revelation represents the most critical juncture in the case, demanding more scrutiny than any previous lead. Before examining the house, one must understand the weight of the expertise behind these observations. This is not the speculation of an amateur sleuth or a digital theorist. This is not a search for engagement or social media notoriety. This is the assessment of a former Pima County SWAT commander, a man intimately familiar with this specific geography. He spent a career orchestrating high-stakes tactical missions in environments exactly like these quiet foothills. He is a man who knows exactly what these streets look like at 2 in the morning. He understands the surgical precision required to execute a targeted mission in this neighborhood without leaving a trace. His previous public analysis of the Guthrie case was clinical and uncompromising. After analyzing the masked intruder's gear and the timing of the breach, his conclusions were deeply sobering. He categorized the abduction as a highly intentional, meticulously targeted crime directed at that specific residence. The depth of preparation suggested a predator who had carefully calculated their every move. Even if the suspect was not a professional, they possessed a clear and disciplined plan. It was an intentional act, followed by a period of calculated, disciplined silence. This was his initial take on the subject's psyche. Now, in a 19th of March exclusive, the analyst has dug deeper. Yet, he is no longer merely describing the person's actions. He is outlining what he views as the physical framework of the crime, he isn't just suggesting there was a plot. He is identifying the location where that plot was hatched. That distinction carries immense psychological weight. A major national news outlet sought him out after reports broke regarding the Bureau's sudden interest in a certain vacant residence. This reveals how gravely this intelligence is being weighed, far beyond any public statements. We must clarify what was reported, as precision separates truth from noise. On March 17th, during a broadcast, an investigator shared a detail never before made public regarding the federal authorities. Sources close to the case claimed agents returned to the Foothills with specific queries about a nearby lease. It was a home that went quiet right when the victim vanished. His precise words, "One resident left before the disappearance, and they are now asking pointed questions about that timeline." The reporter noted this does not prove a link to the abduction, yet agents were focused on that house, the occupants, and their departure. Simultaneously, another veteran journalist went on air with a jarringly different narrative. He claimed the renters vanished immediately after the crime. In his view, they were there until the snatch. These are not merely two ways to view one event. These are two polar opposite timelines, each suggesting a very different set of consequences. If the initial reports hold, we are looking at a property that fell empty during the staging phase. An empty house means no one was there to witness anything suspicious or out of place. No one to notice a stranger or a vehicle that did not belong on that street. In that specific scenario, a vacant home in the days before February 1st is, as an expert would say, a tactical gift for anyone needing a vantage point without eyes on them. If the secondary account is right and they left afterward, the mystery shifts entirely. Fleeing a rental right after a local kidnapping without warning is a move that looks to be objective, like a deliberate extraction, not a standard move. It seems less coincidental and more sudden. A sterile exit when staying put is no longer viable. The Bureau is clearly weighing both outcomes. The phrasing "asking more questions" suggests this is an active, unresolved lead. This is the language of an open wound. One of these accounts is the truth. The authorities know which. Now, consider the neighbors who were suspicious long before the agents returned. Local Laura, speaking on camera from her own street, detailed the unsettling things she saw. She explained that in an area with few rentals, there was one house nearby where the occupants vanished within days of the crime. She noticed their car was gone. She calculated the timing from that missing vehicle, a moment she felt aligned with the abduction. She couldn't be certain of the exact day, but the void was strange enough to trigger a call. She explained, "I felt it might be trivial, but I wanted them to know those people had simply disappeared." She reported it because, in a neighborhood of habit, a vehicle vanishing without a moving truck, or a single goodbye, feels fundamentally wrong. Not necessarily criminal, but jarring. Then there is the long-term resident, Aldine Meister. She has lived in these foothills for nearly 30 years. During the opening stages of the inquiry, she consulted with Brian Enton repeatedly, identifying the empty residence of her own accord within 48 hours of Nancy's disappearance. Her testimony to Enton was remarkably blunt, noting that the neighbors on her other side had departed, and insisting that the empty structure be searched. She signaled the threat in week 1. Yet, 42 days passed before federal investigators began asking the very questions Aldine Meister had posed since the beginning. However, Meister's account contained an additional, unsettling observation. It is a detail that, when weighed against recent public disclosures, shifts the entire psychological landscape. In the 14 to 21 days preceding Nancy's disappearance, she informed Enton that she had witnessed a shadowy figure prowling the neighborhood. A man who clearly did not belong in that environment. His features were obscured, hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat, his posture noticeably hunched and guarded. He wore no athletic gear or hiking attire, appearing in ordinary street clothes that stood out in a community where everyone usually blends in. To her, he was an anomaly. She later recounted on film how she spotted this suspicious individual, keeping his head down and avoiding notice. He moved with a distinct slouch, dressed in nondescript urban clothing rather than the typical outdoor wear seen in the area. The sight struck her as bizarre because it felt unnatural, a solitary figure who was a stranger in a place where everyone is known. Hold that mental image, as former federal agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, a prominent and highly respected voice in the analysis of this case, has scrutinized the footage of the masked intruder captured by Nancy's security system on January 11th. This occurred 21 days prior to the kidnapping, a visit Kidnapper professionally interpreted as a calculated dry run for the crime. This represents her expert profiling of the perpetrator's behavior, rather than a formal statement from the Bureau. Still, it is significant that the Guthrie family's latest appeal specifically asks the public to search their memories for January 11th and January 24th. They are not requesting a general timeline. They are highlighting those two specific dates. When a family, working in tandem with federal agents, requests focus on two specific evenings weeks before the event, it implies those dates hold heavy investigative weight. These timestamps are not arbitrary. They represent moments of critical tactical significance to the ongoing search. If the hunched, out-of-place figure Meister observed was indeed conducting the rehearsal Kidnapper described before February 1st, then Meister may have witnessed the predator in his scouting phase, watching the home, learning Nancy's habits, and mapping the vulnerabilities of the street. She provided the lead immediately, and now, 6 weeks later, the FBI is finally acting on the suspicions she voiced from day one. Let's examine the operational blueprint described, because the terminology used in recent discussions is far from accidental. This is the language of a professional who has spent 30 years planning and executing tactical operations within these exact types of residential settings. He suggested that investigators view a vacant property as a potential home base or a strategic staging point for the offender. Those were his precise terms. A home base, a staging point. In a tactical sense, a staging location is where you cache supplies, store your tools, and retreat between surveillance missions, allowing you to exist in plain sight without triggering any alarms or suspicion. To the world, you are just a tenant living in the house next door. No one questions a vehicle in the driveway. It was noted that occupying a nearby rental grants a suspect a perfect cover story for their presence. A cover story, not an alibi, a distinction that was made with deliberate professional intent. An alibi accounts for your whereabouts after a crime. A cover story justifies your presence in real time before the crime even begins. It allows a predator to sit in a vehicle outside a residence at midnight without drawing attention. If a neighbor looks out, the answer is ready. I live right there. The suspicion dies instantly, and no one calls the authorities. Then, a more specific operational detail was brought to light. It was suggested that someone using a nearby empty house could stay below the radar while monitoring the daily pulse and activity of the entire street. They could track the timing of every resident's movements, including those of Nancy herself. This assessment, rooted in nearly 30 years of law enforcement experience, describes the cold reality of pre-operational surveillance. This psychological pattern is a constant in every meticulously planned abduction. No predator simply arrives one evening and improvises a crime of this precision. They watch and wait first. They study the rhythms of the house, building a profile of when the target is most isolated and most vulnerable. They identify the blind spots from a mere 50 feet away, a standard distance between properties in the Catalina Foothills. At that range, weeks of quiet observation reveal the most intimate secrets of a home and its resident. You can pinpoint exactly when the bedroom lights go dark each night. You can clock the morning routine and the evening habits, noting whether the front door or the garage is the preferred exit. Tracking the arrival or absence of a car becomes simple. A watcher can time the precise seconds between a garage door lifting and its final closure. You map out the blind spots, distinguishing the lenses trained on the pavement from those tucked away. Careful observation reveals with chilling certainty if a resident sleeps alone or hosts company. This is a cold analysis, not a guess. Such data is the harvest of 50 feet of distance and weeks of calculating, silent patience. Records of Nancy's final night confirm that, at 5:32 p.m. on January 31st, she took a ride-share to a family dinner. Arriving home at 9:48 p.m., she pulled in. 2 minutes later, at 9:50 p.m., the garage door shut, sealing her inside. The street lay swallowed in shadows. No guests were expected. No one else was there to stay the night. Suddenly, at 1:47 a.m., on February 1st, the front door camera signal severed. The feed simply vanished into a black screen. In a tactical context, an observer lurking nearby would have identified the gap from 9:48 to 1:47 as the ideal window. Roughly 4 hours of isolation, a hushed suburb, and the complete absence of any prying eyes. The figure, caught by the lens, face obscured, moved with the calculated precision of someone who had come equipped for a purpose. The details are verified. A mask, gloves, heavy clothing, a pistol secured to his waist, and a 25-liter hiking pack. Federal authorities have profiled the suspect as a male, standing roughly 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a medium frame. Months later, there is no name, no arrest, and no primary suspect. This attire reflects a cold plan, not a sudden impulse. To any veteran investigator reviewing the video, the conclusion is unanimous. This was a tactical kit. This was deliberate readiness for a singular objective on a predetermined date. A specific revelation from an interview with an expert stands as perhaps the most critical insight since the doorbell footage went public. He suggested that an unoccupied residence, and I want to emphasize his exact terminology here, could serve as a covert staging ground for monitoring technology, hidden away from the suburban gaze. These devices could be effortlessly concealed within a building or on the grounds, remaining entirely undetected. This isn't some digital conspiracy theory. It is the calculated evaluation of a former SWAT commander from Pima County. It isn't clickbait. It is a framework provided by a man who spent decades deconstructing how organized crimes are staged and executed. Specialized monitoring gear, tucked away inside a building, hidden from every passing soul. This moves beyond the simple image of a stalker peering through lenses from a distance. The expert is highlighting the likelihood of a fixed installation, perhaps a camera or an advanced recording system. A sensor or lens designed to track the house for days on end, functioning perfectly without a human operator being present. A live transmission accessible from miles away, while the source property looked entirely deserted to everyone in the area. The Bureau understands the feasibility of such a setup, just as the experts do. The return of federal investigators to that specific street, weeks after the disappearance, speaks volumes. Their focus on that one vacant lot indicates they are treating the theory of technical surveillance as a high priority. Then there is the matter of the laborers, a secondary lead that most reports have either glossed over or ignored completely. It is vital because it maps out the internal logic of the current federal profile. Records indicate that agents were doing more than just sniffing around that empty rental house. They were actively canvassing the neighborhood, demanding the full names of every individual contractor who had been on site before Nancy vanished. Not just firm names. They wanted the identities of every specific laborer, sorted by project and time frame. Every person who stepped on those lots, one local resident claimed that a neighbor with an active build site was approached by the authorities. Federal agents pressured her for a comprehensive list of every worker and subcontractor who had set foot on her land. No exceptions. Why correlate this with the empty house? Because laborers and nearby tenants both possess a single, dangerous advantage. Both have a valid, completely mundane reason to be there. They can walk these streets every day without triggering the alarm bells that a stranger usually would. A truck parked at 7 a.m. is invisible. A crew taking lunch on the curb or surveying a fence line is just part of the background. It all dissolves into the mundane reality of the suburb, never sparking the suspicion that a solitary, unknown pedestrian would. By the very definition of their jobs, these workers are professional observers. They learn who leaves for work at dawn and who sleeps late. They see the house's weak points and its layout over months of proximity. To observe a target residence persistently without triggering alarm or seeming out of character, a nearby labor site serves as the ultimate tactical screen, fitting the precise profile of a professional blind. An experienced federal analyst recently shared a cold assessment of what this specific level of bureau scrutiny signals. He noted that while agents are circling back, he offered a vital perspective on that movement. Revisiting the past is not a retreat. It is a calculated advance triggered by a recent breakthrough. A fresh name, a buried memory, or a new lead requiring scrutiny against the existing case file. Two paths, the abandoned rental and the laborers, are being investigated in tandem. Within this operational lens, both address one chilling question. Who held a valid excuse to linger near the victim's home before February 1st? And was that cover a mask? Currently, let us examine what criminal science dictates a specialized recovery team would prioritize inside that specific dwelling. This is not conjecture. It is the rigid application of modern investigative protocol. Human beings shed biological signatures constantly and without intent, leaving microscopic traces on every surface they touch. Strands of hair containing genetic blueprints become woven into the fabrics, carpets, and floorboards. Minute amounts of saliva are deposited on handles, glassware, or any object near head height. In any space where a person dwells for even 2 weeks, the volume of contact genetic markers is immense. It settles deep into the rugs, the wood grain, the frames of windows, and the backing of furniture. The advantage of a rental is that the list of people with authorized access is strictly defined. Managers maintain records, allowing investigators to interview past occupants and filter their genetic data out of the pool. What remains is the outlier biological evidence from a ghost who had no legitimate reason to set foot inside. This is why the discovery is so pivotal to the current search for answers. Local law enforcement officials have gone on the record to confirm that a mixture of genetic material was found at the victim's home DNA, not belonging to her or her circle. Leadership stated publicly that they believe they possess the genetic profile of the person responsible. The sample is complex and layered, requiring the lab nearly 12 months to isolate a distinct individual profile. Detectives have already pivoted toward advanced ancestral tracing methods to break the case. It is the same science that unmasked infamous killers, but the presence of a second site changes the math. If that empty house was a tactical staging ground, and we must clarify, this is a professional theory rather than a settled fact, then it is where a crime was born and planned. If forensic teams find biological markers there that match the mystery profile from the victim's home, they gain a rare advantage. Multi-site genetic linkage. 2 distinct scenes of interest, 2 independent collection efforts, separate custody logs, but 1 matching biological signature. It forces a singular, unavoidable confrontation. Account for your presence in both of these locations. Explain why your genetic code was found inside the victim's residence and the property next door. Federal prosecutors view this as a fundamentally different level of evidence than a single source sample could provide. Moving furniture to secure a clear line of sight toward the victim's house leaves physical echoes. Weighted indentations in the carpet fibers remain visible unless the flooring is professionally restored. Friction marks on a sill where a watcher leaned are recoverable, and even if spying hardware was removed, the act of extraction leaves scars. Mounting punctures or adhesive residue with a unique chemical fingerprint, the distinct paths of wiring along the walls, and forgotten storage media like micro-secure digital cards or small memory sticks lost in a panicked exit that could hold weeks of surreptitious video of the home. None of these findings are public yet, as the Bureau has not revealed what their search uncovered. I am merely outlining the standard scientific roadmap used in such high-stakes investigations. It is what any elite team would systematically track based on the strategic patterns identified in this case. Consider the federal response when national reporters reached out to the local field office. We sought specific details regarding the empty house and the scrutinized laborers. Their reply was cold, stating they generally ignore outside journalistic reporting. Citing Department of Justice protocol, they refused comment the bureaucratic equivalent of a deadbolt. In a case where the Bureau has carefully selected which details to leak, from the porch footage to the blood and genetic traces found on site, labeling this a targeted snatching makes their silence on one house very significant. They haven't cleared that location, nor have they claimed it held no evidence. They are offering nothing, and in this game, that void is a choice. Ex-agent Jennifer Coffindaffer weighed in on the investigation's momentum late this March. She sees a white-hot operation, noting that unseen progress doesn't mean total stagnation. She claims they are drowning in a flood of leads beyond typical cases. That insight comes from a veteran who knows the hidden intensity of federal hunts. Here is the evidence that remains indisputable and grounded in fact. And here are the unverified rumors, because you deserve the absolute truth. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished February 1st, 2026, leaving blood on her porch. Her camera died at 1:47 a.m. after spotting an armed, masked figure. The suspect is male, 5 to 9 to 5 to 10, with foreign DNA found inside. Sheriff Nanos calls this a targeted abduction. The family offered $1 million. The Bureau added 100,000 more as 13,000 tips poured in. Nancy remains missing. Now, for the journalistic leads, the Bureau won't confirm. Insider reports suggest a renewed federal focus on that specific vacant rental property. The granular vetting of every construction worker was also surfaced by the press. Discrepancies exist regarding tenant timelines and the theory of a tactical staging ground. These are expert theories, not official findings, much like the January 11th rehearsal. Her psychological profile isn't verified fact, nor is the existence of an accomplice. Detective Dab built this perspective from public files, weighing every single reported thread. Nancy Guthrie, 84, was taken barefoot in her pajamas without her vital medication. She needs those pills. Meanwhile, her family is enduring a state of agony. If you were near the Catalina Foothills between January 11th and February 1st, 2026, and saw a strange car or a suspicious face or lights in an empty house, federal agents are waiting for your call. Use 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit the official tips.fbi.gov portal. Reports suggest the Bureau thinks someone operated from a house near Nancy's door. According to retired Commander Bob Creek, who led the local SWAT team, that residence showed every sign of being a cold, calculated staging location, a place to observe and prepare before striking an 84-year-old living alone. The vehicle is gone, the house sits silent, and the truth remains hidden. Nancy Guthrie is still gone, and the search for answers will not cease. If this case haunts you, subscribe and share this with those following it. Tell us your theories below. Collective attention makes it harder for predators to hide. Nancy deserves to be found and brought back to her family.